Good morning, everybody. It's 10:01, so we are only 1 minute late. Welcome to the OECD. My name is Nicola Bonucci, and I will be your facilitator today. I would like to welcome all participants to the high-level webinar, International Organizations and Their Members Facing the Global Crisis Together. I would like in particular to welcome the UK Minister of State for Asia at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, Nigel Adams. I would like to welcome 9 heads of international organization in a speaking role, 18 heads of international organization present, and 39 international organizations represented overall. I also would like to welcome 15 OECD ambassadors and 31 countries, as well as 5 members of the academic friendship of the EO partnership. As you know, this event was originally planned to be held in London in March 2020, just a few days after the COVID outbreak forced the countries of the world to lock down. So it takes place today, virtually, back to back with the launch of the review of International Regulatory Cooperation of the UK, which happened yesterday, and a dynamic exchange which followed. I would like in particular to thank the United Kingdom for its commitment to this event, as well as the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland, and I would like to welcome and recognize the financial support that both countries have offered to the IO partnership. This meeting, ladies and gentlemen, comes at a critical juncture for multilateralism and international rulemaking. It was already evident that the IO partnership was useful when it was set up, but I would say that COVID-19 proves almost indispensable now. It provides an ideal space to exchange on the challenges facing international organizations in the adaptation of our rulemaking activities to arising emergencies and changes of the digital area, to rethink the form of cooperation between IOs and to deliver instruments that are useful and trusted by government, civil society, and other stakeholders. The work of the IO partnership supports the effort for clear, evidence-based, flexible, and high-quality international rules that enable a successful and sustainable responses to the crisis and its aftermath. Notwithstanding the time of crisis that we are in now, 2020 has been an active year for the IO partnership. Between May and July, we held 4 dedicated COVID-19 webinars to provide a platform for IOs to exchange on their practices facing the emergency. We also have continued to advance the development of the compendium of IO practices for effective international rulemaking under the coordination of the OECD Secretariat, but with the strong support of all the organizations in the partnership, and in particular of the focal point, and I would like to recognize them today: BIPM, ISO, OECD, Organization for International Epizooty, CIECA, WCO, and WHO. Finally, the secretariats of the OO partnership have worked on a joint statement to be released today, showing their collective commitment to the quality, effectiveness, and importance of international rulemaking, and their willingness to engage in both individual and concerted efforts in the areas of stakeholder engagement, implementation, evaluation, and coordination of their rulemaking activities. Today, the meeting is a wonderful opportunity to have an open exchange of views at this critical and challenging moment for multilateralism. More international organizations are needed in today's world. More effective international organizations are needed in today's world. More coordinated international organizations are needed in today's world, and more evidence-based international rulemaking is needed. Through this exchange, we hope to continue advancing the discussion of the IO partnership and support the finalization of the compendium. Before giving the floor to the opening remarks of Minister Adams and Secretary General of the OECD, Angel Gurria, I would like to remind participants that during these high-level sessions, only speakers should have their video turned on. So, without further delay, because this is one also of the beauties of the virtual world, is that we need to keep track of the time very scrupulously. I would like to welcome first the present and give the floor to Minister Nigel Adams, the newly appointed Minister of State for Asia at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office at the United Kingdom. And I would like to note that according to our information, this is the Minister's first event in this new capacity. So I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate him and invite him to open the event by offering his opening remarks. Minister, you have the floor. Minister, I think you should unmute.
I apologize. The technical difficulties of Zoom have consumed us this morning, but I'm not sure if you heard any of that, but I'd just like to thank you, Nicola, for opening today's meeting and your kind words, and thank everyone for joining us, and thank Secretary General Gurria and all our friends at the OECD for bringing us together this morning. As we battle through the biggest public health emergency in a generation, our interdependence and the vulnerabilities in our global health, economic and governance systems have been laid bare. There's clearly never been a more critical and challenging time for the international community to work together. International organizations and the rules and standards they help set are key to fighting this virus and emerging from this pandemic together stronger and also in a more sustainable way. International organizations are the glue that bind us. They inform us, they challenge us, and they also chivvy us along. They make us more than the sum of our parts. Each of the international organizations who are with us today have their own unique strengths and expertise, and we're delighted to be joined by senior representatives from organizations as diverse as the International Telecommunication Union, the International Maritime Organization, UN Conference on Trade and Development, UN Food and Agricultural Organization, and the International Organization for Standardization. And there are many more organizations who are all playing a crucial role in convening countries to agree approaches on trade, energy, health, technology, and other shared priorities. Many of these organizations have been architects of global economic governance, and our co-host at the OECD has been highly influential in shaping the global approach in areas as diverse as artificial intelligence, corporate social responsibility, and tax. The OECD has also been a go-to resource against COVID. The COVID-19 hub has informed domestic policies and the international response. They've also led the way with in-depth analysis on the economic impact of COVID-19. Despite the need for countries to be joined up in the fight against COVID, global unity of purpose is sadly not yet a reality. No country can put COVID behind it until every country is able to do so. Consensus building and a joined up approach are absolutely vital. So being joined up in this regard, it helps save lives. But just look at how mutual recognition or harmonization of standards sped up the movement of PPE and the medical equipment to where it was needed. Without the work that many of you do on standards and harmonization, this simply could not happen. So by acting fast and working together, we can also shape a global recovery from COVID that advances rather than hinders our climate, our biodiversity, and the wider environmental priorities that we have. So the decisions we make as we strive to bounce back will either lay the foundations for sustainable and inclusive growth, or lock in polluting emissions for decades to come. Now, the UK has always been a leading proponent of the multilateral system, and I believe our aim to be a force for good in the world radiates through the international response that we've seen to COVID. We've pledged more than £770 million to combat the impacts of the virus around the globe, which I believe places us amongst the world's biggest donors. We're also financing some of the most advanced vaccine research programs, which many of you will be aware of, at Oxford University in particular, and Imperial College London. And we've been absolutely clear that vaccines and treatments should be made available as rapidly and as widely as possible. We're working with our G7 and G20 partners to build a coordinated response to the virus and also its economic impacts, delivering on the commitments set out in the ambitious G20 action plan, which was agreed in April. Of course, the pre-COVID challenges have also not gone away. Technology, for all its many benefits, is a constant disruptor to our security and liberties. In a technological age when innovators will always outpace regulators, there will always be work to do to protect individuals, organizations, and nations. So regulatory diplomacy should be the top of every government to-do list. We should all want to be part of writing a fair rule book and establishing norms that genuinely benefit our planet and everyone on it. So let's use this critical juncture, an unprecedented time when the whole world is going through this major struggle together, to rethink the way we do things and strive for a better, safer, and more sustainable world. So that's enough from me. I now have the pleasure of handing you over to Secretary General Gurria. So thank you, everyone, for listening this morning.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister, for your wise word. And we cannot agree more with the fact that we need to work more together than ever. I would like now to invite Secretary General Angel Gurria, Secretary General of the OECD, host of this meeting today, to deliver his remarks.
Thank you very much, Minister Adams. We're going to borrow your speech, and we're going to take the first few phrases that refer to the work of the multilateral organizations and how they improve the state of the world, and how they produce better policies for better lives, and how they also challenge the countries to do better. I think we're going to put them in golden letters someplace here in the lobby of the OECD. But that's a wonderful way to start, because it's inspirational and it also puts in context what it is that we're doing here. So, Minister Adams, ambassadors, colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our 7th annual meeting of the Partnership for Effective Rulemaking by International Organizations, so-called IO partnership. Let me thank you for joining us under these exceptional circumstances. Today's meeting is perhaps the most important we've had so far. the COVID-19 pandemic, the associated social and economic impacts have brought the world to a standstill. The wounds run deep. The 6% contraction in global GDP that we projected for 2020 in our most recent economic outlook is the largest in the 60 years of OECD's existence. And in case of a second wave of infections, global GDP could decline by more than 7.5%. This unprecedented challenge comes at a time when the multilateral system is strained and suffering a major trust deficit. We need to restore that trust. Trust in the governments and multilateral institutions that are supposed to defend their rights, as well as to protect them from the pandemic and its dire economic and social consequences. The crisis is also an opportunity to show the value and effectiveness of international cooperation. International organizations have reacted swiftly to serve their members during the crisis. The OECD has reacted swiftly also, and it has reacted, I believe, effectively. We launched the digital hub that Minister Adams alluded to. It's called the Digital Hub on Tackling the Coronavirus. It provides a single entry point to all of OECD's analysis on the economic and social impacts of COVID-19. We published over 200 policy briefs in virtually all areas of our work: health, macroeconomic analysis, labor, social policies, trade, education, SMEs, tourism, taxation, you name it. We're also actively working with non-OECD countries, notably through our development center and our regional programs. We're also working with other international organizations like ASEAN, ECLAC, the IDB, the OAS, and CAF. We're also adapting our tools to the new COVID-19 reality. Our recently adopted OECD recommendations on consumer product safety and on the governance of infrastructure take account of the impact of COVID-19, such as in the context of increased online purchases. The 2012 OECD recommendations on the governance of clinical trials help facilitate today international cooperation in clinical trials on medicinal products, particularly relevant in the quest for safe and effective COVID-19 treatments. The crisis and response will be important going forward in the development, review, and revision of OECD standards, such as in the area of tourism, a sector especially hard hit by the pandemic. And we're strengthening our efforts to promote more transparent, effective international regulatory cooperation. As highlighted in our recent policy brief on the international regulatory cooperation response to the COVID-19 crisis, it's a very lengthy title, such cooperation can help manage cross-border risks, promote work sharing, and also pooling of resources and knowledge across governments for more effective policy responses at lesser costs, and reduce barriers to trade in essential goods, especially those that are required to fight the pandemic. For instance, we need to strengthen our cooperation to reach a consensus-based solution to the tax challenges arising from the digitalization of the economy. Patience is wearing thin as the crisis and the containment measures have resulted in the activities and profits of a number of digital companies skyrocketing while many are going bankrupt. Failure to deliver a political agreement comes with serious risks of escalating tax and trade tensions, which would further undermine the global economy and the recovery. I'm pleased to welcome the statement that sets out critical actions by the secretariats of the international organizations of the IO partnership. They should strive for effective, impactful, and coordinated international rulemaking. The OECD is committed to implementing the actions of the statement, and in particular, to continue working for the collaborative development of a quote-unquote compendium for international organizations for effective international rulemaking. This is a guiding tool to ensure that the norms that we develop for our members and beyond are effective, impactful, and meet the increasing demands for transparency, inclusiveness, and coordination. So, Mr. Minister, dear friends, colleagues, each of us here has a role to play in creating an effective, multilateral, rules-based system, as well as in making sure that governments coordinate their actions to deliver, quote-unquote, better policies for better lives worldwide. This means investing in multilateral solutions to end today's global health and economic crisis and to prevent tomorrow's crises. The IO partnership has allowed us to reflect together on our weaknesses and build on our strengths. This crisis is an opportunity to show its value, the value of the IO partnership, as a unique and essential forum to learn from each other and undertake common actions towards our common objectives. Count on the OECD to continue supporting the work of the IO partnership. We count on you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General. I really would like to thank both of you, Minister Adams and Secretary General, for these powerful introductory remarks, which indeed puts the whole discussion in the right context. Without further delay, I would like now to introduce the first round of discussion. As you know, there will be 2 rounds of discussion followed, hopefully by some more free interventions. This first round will focus on what the global crisis triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic, but as Minister Adams said, not forgetting also the pre-COVID-19 challenges that the international community was facing. So we'll focus on what the global crisis has revealed regarding the need for coordinated action internationally and the importance of transparent, evidence-based, and flexible international rules to support countries in this regard. 4 heads will be speaking now on this topic. I will give the floor to each of them one after the other. And I will kindly remind them that if they could stick to the 5 minutes intervention, that would allow space for questions and intervention from the floor, which I'm sure will be appreciated by all. So I now give the floor to the first panelist, Mrs. Anne Hayes. Anne Hayes is the chairperson of the Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme, PICS. Mrs. Hayes, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Honourable Minister, Honourable Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain how the COVID pandemic has impacted our organisation and activities and our response to date. Let me present to you very briefly who we are. The Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme, PICS, is a non-binding cooperative arrangement between 53 medicines regulatory authorities working in the field of good manufacturing practice by developing guidance, harmonisation of standards and training of inspectors who inspect manufacturers of medicinal products for human and veterinary use. Application of good manufacturing practice, GMP, during the manufacture of medicinal products ensures that they meet the required quality standards and are safe for patients. This is a very important aspect of public health, as unsafe medicines can have a devastating effect on patients' well-being and overall health. The 2,000 inspectors of PICS members inspect domestic and foreign companies producing dosage forms and active pharmaceutical ingredients. Where inspection outcomes are satisfactory, GMP certificates may be issued to the manufacturers, and this facilitates exports of their products to other countries. As you can imagine, the COVID pandemic has had very significant impacts on the inspections of PICS authorities. Domestic on-site inspections were suspended and foreign inspections were stopped due to travel restrictions. OECD countries import most of their medicinal products, and we are extremely dependent on effective supply chains, as shown during the early days of the pandemic, when many countries faced shortages in some products. The initial response of PICS members was uncoordinated, and each medicines regulatory authority took the action that it deemed necessary and appropriate. However, the actions taken were consistent with others and comprised of introducing regulatory flexibilities where appropriate. For example, by extending the validity of all GMP certificates up to the end of 2021, and by identifying alternative processes to on-site inspections. Those alternatives consisted of remote assessments, reliance on GMP inspections of other medicines regulatory authorities, and remote inspections, which are carried out virtually at a distance using video technology. Faced with these unprecedented developments, PICS has decided to take a lead and is organising a virtual seminar on remote assessment of GMP compliance, which will be hosted by the Finnish Medicines Agency in December. As for all PICS events, this seminar is open to both PICS members and non-members. The purpose of the seminar is to harmonise current practices on remote GMP assessment of manufacturers of medicines and to address the challenges of virtual real-time inspections. Following the seminar, we will develop common terminology and best practice, which may become worldwide standards. In line with our procedures, we will undertake public consultations before adopting these rules, allowing stakeholders, which consist mainly of industry and patient organisations, to give their views. This year's seminar on the remote assessment of GMP compliance will be the first virtual seminar in our 50-year-long history. Due to the pandemic, our regular meetings and training activities will be held virtually. Online training, though, is not a new concept to PICS, as we have in the past few years established a PICS Inspectorates Academy, which is developing online training for inspectors and delivering that. Relying on virtual tools is another consequence of the COVID pandemic that we have all experienced, and where the input of the OECD would be greatly appreciated. To conclude, I would like to share with you the lessons that PICS as a health organisation has drawn from the COVID pandemic. The greater reliance between medicines regulatory authorities worldwide is necessary to share available information and reduce our requirement for foreign inspections, where it's not possible temporarily or in the longer term. Best practice and common terminology on remote inspections must be harmonised internationally to avoid differences, which will make it more difficult to recognise and accept their outcomes. The OECD's work to harmonise the rulemaking of international organisations is essential and must be strengthened. We all have to learn from each other. My personal conclusion from the pandemic is that there is nothing more important than health. So let me finish by wishing all of you continued good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hayes, for this very concrete introductory presentation to today's discussion. I would like just to make two observations. First, I noted the point that you made that the first responses to this crisis in an institution which actually the whole purpose is to ensure mutual recognition and coordination were uncoordinated. And I think this is a lesson that we need to draw from the future. We need to avoid uncoordinated answers to something which is as global as a pandemic. And in the future, as the Secretary General recognized, there could be different crises which can take different forms, but we need absolutely to improve coordination and business continuity. The second observation I would like to make is also to note the interdependence of the work that we do each other on a daily basis. You refer to remote inspection carried out and following GLP principles. Now, the good laboratory practices principles are principles that were developed by the OECD in the past, and they are used in areas like the one that you are in. I would like now to invite Mr. Mukisha Kituyi, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD. And I would like to take this opportunity to welcome UNCTAD as the official 50 partner organization of the International Organization Partnership. UNCTAD just joined recently, and we're very happy to have UNCTAD on board with us. Mr. Kituyi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Moderator, Honorable Minister Adams, and our host, Angel. Ladies and gentlemen, we at UNCTAD are pleased not only to join this partnership, but also to join the initiative on effective international rulemaking to reaffirm our commitment to inclusiveness, quality, and impactful international standards, particularly relevant at this time when rules-based system is facing mounting challenges. International organizations need to cooperate more closely, emphasizing that their role as a safe space for building trust today exceeds their role as a source of hard rulemaking. The reckoning brought on by COVID-19 has compounded a crisis in international rulemaking, which was already making difficult challenges, particularly in multilateral trade rules. By cooperating, international organizations can work to stitch together the pieces of a shattered multilateralism by concentrating less on hard rules and negotiations and more by building goodwill through soft law processes. And this means collectively grappling with the holistic complexity that the SDG agenda presents us and harnessing the possibility for frank exchange focused on consensus building without needing to fashion consensus into legally binding rules and provisions. International organizations provide venues for policymakers to explore ideas and possibilities for consensus without pressure to commit to obligations. Some areas where such soft law consensus can be fruitfully explored include development-related trade, investment, industrial, financial, competition, technology policies that support trade and the building of transformative productive capacities, and the many issues related to the emerging digital technologies. A fairer sharing of the benefits of globalization could result from taking more globally coordinated steps towards a collective policy stance in these and other areas. What we need today is a consultative process that debates the future of multilateralism based on full, equal, and voluntary participation of all parties concerned, and designed to ensure that globalization and integration into the global economy is consistent with countries' respective needs and concerns at the different levels of economic development. International organizations play an essential role, not only through their dialogue platforms and soft law instruments, but also through technical cooperation tools and research and analysis products. As international organizations look to build a fairer globalization, we must cooperate together with each other in building new smart partnerships and communities of engagement with non-traditional interlocutors, including firms, academic community, CSOs, who understand and respect the scientific academies, but also the regulatory responsibility of policymakers. Now, without closer cooperation and flexibility from international organizations, the growing bilateralization of many disciplines may upset ongoing sub-regional, regional, and international integration processes. Countries are today confronted with a difficult challenge of making their regulatory policy consistent with and supportive of the different layers of integration efforts, including by ensuring adequate sequencing and pacing of parallel negotiations. These are particularly big challenge for developing countries with very limited capacities, especially with respect to the so-called beyond the border issues, where bilateral agreements can set strong, high standard regulatory disciplines that may eventually become fait accompli regulations. In current trade negotiations, for example, these include services, investment, intellectual property rights, competition policies, e-commerce, and cross-border data localization policies. We in the international organizations must provide all countries the safe space they need to understand the implications of the increasingly complex technical disciplines of economic globalization. Such high standard regulatory disciplines could potentially constrain countries' abilities to undertake proactive policies aimed at enhancing productive capacity and structural transformation, and potentially override rule-making at multilateral and other fora. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kitui, for reminding us that in this virtual world, there is still a real one in which people exchange goods and services, and that we need to do everything possible to preserve this real world. I would also note in your speech the importance that you put to soft law, which naturally is very dear to the art of the OECD. But I think this also raises a challenge that I leave to all the heads of international organization, is the ability of international organization to continue to negotiate hard law or even soft law in a virtual mode. One of the challenges that we're all facing is how to have virtual meetings that can be as useful and as effective than face-to-face meetings in order to have effective rulemaking. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Kitak Lim, Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, IMO. Mr. Lim, you have the floor.
Organizer, Honorable Minister, Head of the organization. I'm very pleased to join this very important high-level webinar dialogue. The global pandemic has turned all our lives upside down, yet I have been encouraged by the unprecedented level of cooperation and collaboration in maritime world encompassing member state, NGOs, and the multiple maritime industry stakeholders. In practical terms, since the beginning of the pandemic, the IMO has been working in constant liaison with the UN entities, European Commission, and maritime industry, monitoring how this crisis is impacting shipping and responding to various challenges. To help governments and industry address the issues in shipping and maritime business created by the pandemic, IMO has been disseminating guidance and recommendations on a wide variety of COVID-related matters, as well as joint statements with other UN entities, urging action to address, in particular, the crew change crisis, which we are currently experiencing. IMO regulations allow for extension of certificates relating to safety survey of ships and for seafarers certification in certain circumstances. We have been ensuring dissemination of guidance on how states might appropriately apply alternative measures in light of the pandemic. Similarly, guidance and joint statements have been developed in cooperation with the ILO, WHO, ICAO, Unctad, and others to reiterate the need to apply international treaty obligations and regulations to the greatest extent possible. At the present, the biggest challenge facing the shipping world today is the need for crew changes to be carried out safely to relieve seafarers who have been stranded at the sea for months. ILO regulations set a maximum sea time of 11 months, but many have exceeded that. We have received the report of some seafarers being stranded on ships for up to 17 months continuously. Many countries have made significant progress in designating seafarers as key workers and implementing the crew change protocol. But the rate of progress and the throughput is not keeping up with the backlog of seafarers whose contracts have expired and who are waiting for repatriation. According to Seafarers Organization, due to banning or restriction of policy on crew changeover, up to 500,000 seafarers out of 1.6 million seafarers are waiting to travel. Consequently, concerns for the safety of navigation continue, taking into account the fatigue and mental stress issues exacerbated by a long period of service. While there is a long way to go, we have seen a willingness to work together. We need to capitalize on this spirit of collaboration as we move forward in order to keep global supply chain moving. The ability of shipping services and seafarers to transport more than 80% global trade, in particular to deliver essential goods, including medical supplies, food, fuel, is central to responding to and overcoming this crisis. The routes for cross-collaboration between IMO, member states, other UN agencies, the shipping industry, and the Seafarers Organization have long been there, but we need to continue to strengthen and build on them in conjunction with acceleration of economic recovery from COVID-19 through the sustainable global supply chain. Looking forward, we will review and learn from experience during this pandemic to identify any regulatory gaps and fill them in terms of collaboration among all stakeholders. Again, I'm very pleased to join here, and I'm ready to learn the expertise from others. Thank you for your attention.
Hello? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lim. IMO is clearly a crucial player in today's handling of COVID. Maritime transportation is essential for maintaining the level of trade and exchanges. It has also its own challenges in terms of developing clusters, as we know. So it is really a wonderful opportunity to listen to your views on this particular topic. My last speaker for the first round of discussion is Mr. Martin Milton, who in normal circumstances would have been a neighbor because his organization is based in Paris, but now will speak virtually. Mr. Martin Milton is the director of the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, known under his French acronym BIPM. Mr. Milton, you have the floor.
Mr. Minister, Your Excellencies, Mr. Guerrier, and ambassadors to the OECD, heads of other IOs, and Mr. Bonucci, thank you for the opportunity to intervene this morning. The BIPM is the intergovernmental organization through which member states act together on matters related to measurement science and measurement standards. It was founded in Paris in 1875 by the signature of the Meter Convention. We currently have 62 member states and 40 associate states and economies. The organization was founded to develop and distribute the original measurement standards for the meter and the kilogram. But since that time, our work has expanded greatly to coordinate the equivalence of measurements made using the SI units for all applications, and also to provide the coordinated scale of time UTC for the world. We work through the National Measurement Institutes, the NMIs, established in the member states. Each country has its own NMI, and some countries have more than one. Hence, there's a global network of more than 250 national institutes in more than 100 countries that are involved in ensuring that measurements are fit for purpose and can be the basis for industry and trade, for science and policy making. Their work is made transparent through the mutual recognition arrangements organized by our supervisory body, the CIPM, that's the International Committee for Weights and Measures. This is based on rigorous peer review of published technical evidence. One of the areas where we have been most active in recent years has been in providing the basis for comparable measurements for use in chemistry and in biology. These support many important global issues, including providing a sound measurement basis for the assurance of food safety, the monitoring of the global environment, and supporting testing in the healthcare sector. Since February this year, there has been an enormous extra demand for these measurements to establish globally comparable measurements of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. National institutes from more than a dozen member states around the world have launched a new study with the goal of supporting globally standardized testing. The ability to measure nucleic acids reproducibly is crucial for molecular testing, which detects the genetic material of the coronavirus itself. This work will allow high accuracy quantification of the reference standards that can support diagnostic manufacturers and ensure the quality of routine testing as it takes place around the world. International standardization of these tests will enable meaningful exchange of information between countries and ensure its suitability for decision making. Another way we bring together international organizations in the healthcare sector is through the Joint Committee for Traceability in Laboratory Medicine. This is an international collaboration overseen by the BIPM with the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation and the International Federations for Clinical Chemistry and Hematology. One of their principal activities is to maintain a database of reference services and materials that manufacturers in the in vitro diagnostics industry can use to meet their regulatory requirements. Triggered by the global pandemic, this collaboration has acted to share information on new developments aiming to improve the reliability of measurements in COVID-19 diagnostics. It has organized webinars led by world experts in the field, sharing their experience on activities that ensure the reliability of measurements. The third activity that I want to highlight this morning is our actions to set up a repository on our web pages of information from 30 member and associate states about specific technical projects, sources of financial assistance, and a summary of their activities to address the COVID-19 pandemic. These are examples of how the work of the NMIs is supporting the fight against the pandemic by applying expertise in measurement science to assist with the development of personal protective equipment, of medical devices, of certified reference materials, or where they have joined efforts in the search for a vaccine. I think this is an excellent example of how we as an IO play a role in sharing information amongst the member states. I've focused in this short summary on our role in coordinating the work of NMIs in member states and associates. The main mechanism by which they have their impact on industry, trade and science is through what we call the national quality infrastructure. We have been very pleased to be able to give international visibility to the work of quality infrastructure through the Oecd network, which is the international network on quality infrastructure. It brings together all specialized organizations that operate at an international level and that are active in promoting and implementing quality infrastructure activities as a tool for sustainable economic development. This includes the work of organizations in metrology, accreditation, standardization, and conformity assessment. Of course, this pandemic came at a time when IOs, like all organizations, were planning a digital transformation in services and activities. We are no exception. We've brought forward plans to allow automated machine-readable access to the information in our databases, and of course, to allow remote access to all our meetings. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the work of the OECD in developing the compendium of international organizations' practices for effective international rulemaking, currently being developed in this collaboration. It will use examples from the BIPM and Oecd, which I mentioned, and from many other IOs to highlight how we work better together and how we can learn from each other about best practices as we go forward. We are also pleased to share with SECA the role of the focal point of the working group on coordination of the IO partnership that works to better tailor the specific needs of IOs and address more in-depth coordination issues. I'd like to give our full support to the joint statement from the secretariats of the IO partnership that will be endorsed this afternoon and which affirms a collective commitment to ensuring the inclusiveness, quality, and impact of international rules and standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milton. I'm not entirely sure, but I have the feeling that you represent the oldest international organization in this virtual meeting, because if I remember well, BIPM was established in 1875 through la Convention Internationale du Maître. And I find it fascinating that the subject of international standardization remains the topic of the day 150 years almost after the establishment of the BIPM. So you certainly have a lot of experience to share with all of us. I would like to thank all the panelists for this first round of discussion, which provided a variety of views and angles to this common challenge of how making effective international rulemaking in the post-COVID, let's be hopeful, post-COVID area. We now have around 20 minutes available for questions, interventions. I know that we have with us virtually a number of other heads of international organizations which are not going to speak in the second round of discussion, who have not spoken yet. So I really would like to offer them this opportunity to either ask questions or make interventions. I also would like to recognize the several OECD ambassadors to the OECD that are with us today, and would like also to offer them the possibility to make an intervention or to ask a question. So the floor is open. I don't know exactly how this will work, but the floor is open to not only the heads and the ambassadors who I mentioned, but naturally also to all the participants who should use the little hand in the Zoom and raise their hand virtually in the Zoom application, and then I will be more than happy to give them the floor. So now you have the instruction from the Secretariat on the same topic. No volunteers? Well, if there are no requests for the floor, questions, as the Secretary General we used to say, violent objections, then maybe we can move to the second part of the panel. Yeah, we can move to the second part of the panel. And at the end of the second part of this high-level meeting, there will be another opportunity. So maybe you can group all the questions so that they are taken at the end. If not, those who know me, I will ask some questions to all of you. And so it's better for you to ask the question than me. So we are now moving to the second round of discussion. And now that the scene has been set out, on the perspective, looking forward on what needs to be done in terms of better, more effective coordination amongst international organizations, in particular, but not limited to normative activities. And this is in order to adapt to what we are now starting to call the new normal. A normal which will probably see a reduction of face-to-face meetings, as I said, more virtual discussion, which have also a lot of advantages, including by attracting more people, maybe to some of those meetings, but have their own challenges. And naturally, also to take lessons, as Mr. Hayes resumed in her intervention, on what we should do better in the future once a new crisis, and there will be a new crisis, different form, but there will be a new crisis, will hit us, so that we don't repeat the same mistake, we don't lose time as maybe this has been the case in the beginning for all of us. So I would like now to give the floor to the four panelists. And again, as in the first round, I will recognize them one by one. And the first panelist to speak on this second topic is Mrs. Monique Eloy, Director General of the World Organization for Animal Health, based in Paris. Mrs. Eloy, you have the floor.
Thank you for your introduction and for the invitation. Your Excellency Minister Nigel Adams, Honorable OECD Secretary General and distinguished guests, I'm very pleased to join you today because the COVID pandemic has revealed, unfortunately once again, the interdependence of many aspects of our world. Interdependence between countries, between economies, and of course, between humans, animals, and nature. Given its leading role in the field of animal health, the World Organization for Animal Health, the OIE, together with FAO and WHO, has been promoting the One Health concept for several years. One Health recognizes that human health and animal health are interdependent and bound to the health of the ecosystem in which they exist. This is evident today when around 60% of human diseases are of animal origin, and 75% of infectious disease emerging in humans are of animal origin. Moreover, the spread of disease in wild animal, as well as dramatic change in biodiversity, deforestation, and of course, impact of climate change, etc., all play an important role in the dynamics of animal and human diseases. As a consequence, a coordinated approach based on a more transdisciplinary approach is necessary at the global level. The OIE has historically cooperated with the WHO and FAO in the form of the tripartite alliance to put the One Health vision into practice with different areas of coordination. Of course, research, but also development of standards, guidelines, development of global strategies, capacity building program, and so on, for a better governance of the national authorities responsible for human health, animal health, and food safety. Nevertheless, the current crisis has revealed the need to strengthen other existing partnerships, as well as to think outside of the box and coordinate with new partners to integrate economic and social impact, climate change, as well as ethical consideration into our work. Our present time is filled with uncertainty, but also with possibilities for innovation. Therefore, how do we operate in a time of uncertainty about the present and the future? How can international organizations and governments better anticipate and innovate to bolster their preparedness for the next phases of the crisis, and also to ensure their resilience for future emergencies, for future crises? One approach is to use foresight. The OIE has taken concrete steps to develop its foresight capabilities by creating a dedicated position within our management structure, as well as by learning from the experiences of other international organizations, such as OECD. We want to understand what could be heading our way and identify activities to future-proof the OIE and, in turn, the veterinary services of our members. In addition, the use of new technologies can provide unprecedented opportunities for veterinary services at national and local level to strengthen their resilience and improve their effectiveness. Digitalization is therefore one of the strategic objectives of the OIE for the next 5 years. The example of the OIE observatory, which is under development, is an additional example. Because collecting, analyzing data on the use of our internal standards will enable us to better understand the challenges faced by our members in implementing standards and to design, consequently, targeted capacity building activities to improve their implementation. In this context, the OIE is adapting, I do believe, to the new normal and preparing for future crises. The restriction of movement, as already highlighted by previous speakers, has supported this transition to teleworking and virtual meetings. These restrictions, in addition to considerations related to climate change, have created a huge impetus to reduce the amount of physical meetings and is increasing pressure to find longer-term solutions. In response to this, the OIE has firstly initiated legal work to revise its rule of procedures. The biggest challenge for us, and probably for some other international organizations within this task, is how to adapt the decision-making processes, just as a voting arrangement, to a digital or virtual environment. Nevertheless, we fully appreciate that virtual meetings will never totally replace the social contact of physical meetings, which contribute to establish trust between members and other stakeholders. And secondly, the OIE is undertaking an after-action review of its response to COVID-19 in order to improve its institutional preparedness and resilience to exceptional events which may impact business continuity. The recent development of the Compendium of International Organization Practices for Effective International Rulemaking under the OECD's leadership provides international organizations with an excellent opportunity to share experiences, raise lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis, and develop good practices to enhance international cooperation. The OIE has already implemented several key principles set out in the compendium, such as more transparency in the development of OIE standards, as well as a capacity building program to support its members in the implementation of our standards, as well as also the monitoring of the implementation of standards in a more systematic fashion through the OIE Observatory, and also coordination with other international organizations, in particular FAO, WHO, through our tripartite alliance. In addition, the compendium presents other key principles in terms of stakeholder engagement and evaluation that offer new perspective on how the OIE can improve in the future. And the OIE next strategic plan, which will be adopted in May 2021, will be certainly an excellent opportunity to put into practice the new and additional key principle highlighted in the compendium. So in conclusion, let me remind that veterinarians usually say that animal diseases don't know borders, but crises don't know borders too. Therefore, to tackle global challenges, solutions can only come from a strong international cooperation. And I would like therefore really warmly thank the OECD for its initiative, and finally underline the significant value from our point of view of the work undertaken within the framework of the international organization partnerships. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Madame Eloi. This concept of One Health, I think, is a fascinating concept, but in a sense, it's a translation of the fact that we are living in one world. And if we look at the two crises that have hit the world in the last 10 years, this one and the previous one, the financial crisis, they have one point in common, which is the recognition that what happens in one country has impact on all the other countries, and that you cannot, as you pointed out, deal with that on a purely national basis. So maybe what the IO partnership could help is developing the concept of one international organization. Let me be clear, I'm not suggesting to merge all the international organizations in one single one, but I'm certainly advocating for a much more coordinated and common approach of international organization. And I think we have very vivid examples of that today. I would like now to give the floor to Ambassador Javier Polinic, Secretary General of the Latin American and Caribbean Economic System, CELA. Ambassador Polinic, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Honorable Minister, Honorable Secretary General, dear colleagues. Coordination in the action of the various international organizations is fundamental to the success of their work at the international level. It is not only a positive factor to avoid duplication of tasks and make a better use of resources, but it would also improve the public perception about the functioning of the international organization, particularly in this pandemic juncture. One of the most common problems in the relation among international organizations is the repetition of tasks. A large number of IO us address the same topics without visible results, which leads to duplication of functions. This forces to redesign the task and action of the international organizations, and to achieve this, it is essential for them to restrict themselves to the objectives and purposes for which they were created, and thus avoid failing into the field of action of each other. The objective should be to address common challenges in a cooperative and coordinated manner, as well as to explore and take advantage of the strength of each organization in their areas of action for better implementation of their assigned mandates. Feedback with the international organization systems will facilitate the guidance and achievement of the goals set with each organization on the basis of separation of objective, instruments, and powers in order to achieve a collaborative work. In pursuing this objective, it will be highly beneficial for universal, regional, or sub-regional international organizations to cooperate and act as a system to avoid duplication of efforts and activities. Little or lack of coordination among international organizations has not only affected the internal dynamics of the relationship system, but also the overlapping of issues has generated in citizens some skepticism regards the relevance, operability, and effectiveness of the work carried out by those international organizations, which sometimes raise doubts whether all of them are really necessary, particularly because of the resources needed for their maintenance. This is a worrying situation for the very effectiveness of the international organization, which require restoring sometimes citizens' confidence in these institutions by revitalizing them and strengthening their thematic leadership. Institutions with more transparent and inclusive operating rules are needed, as well as an effective implementation capacity based on the commitments of party states. In conclusion, we need to go beyond identifying the action we need to implement in order to achieve better cooperation. In this regard, CELA considers appropriate to evaluate a regular forum meetings among the various secretariats of international organizations in order to inform about the objectives and development of their work programs, with the purpose to avoid duplication of work, generate complementarity, exchange of best practices, and thus achieve greater efficiency in our task. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Polinic. You touch upon a real issue, which is indeed not only coordination, but the risk of duplication of activities. I would like maybe to nuance a bit the point that you made. I think there is indeed a duplication of activities, but I think there are two kinds of duplication. There is a good duplication, which is when organizations look at the same issue from different angles. And there is the bad duplication, when all this is done in uncoordinated and incoherent fashion, in which indeed there is a real duplication of work. But I think you're putting a real challenge on how to better use the existing framework for the future in a world of shrinking resources, which I think is a realistic assessment. I would like now to invite Mr. Cunio Mikuria, Secretary General of the World Customs Organization, to address the audience.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mr. Mikuria. Before doing that, may I give a special thank to Ambassador Polinic, because I understand he's based in Caracas. I don't know what time it is in Caracas, but it's certainly very early, too early to be awake. So thank you, Ambassador, for that. Sorry, Mr. Mikuria, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is really a timely initiative to get heads of international organizations to share experience and enhance collaborative spirit. We are all faced with unprecedented challenges. Well, the members of World Customs Organization, 183 customs administrations, they are working on the ground to ensure connectivity at borders, and they take a very pragmatic approach. But COVID-19 has brought a new challenge because many of the borders are either closed or strictly restricted for the movement of people, while for the movement of goods, especially medical goods and essential goods, borders are requested to keep open. So customs administrations should safeguard supply chain at borders while fighting against the spread of COVID-19. Usually, customs are good in coordination. We call it coordinated border management with other border agencies and public and private sector internally and externally. However, what we observed just after the COVID-19 is that there were many restrictions, very strict restrictions, or disproportionate measures taken, lack of coordination, and lack of preparedness at borders. Therefore, unprecedented cooperation of international organizations was called in, and I think we showed that approach of working jointly with other international organizations. We took a very pragmatic approach. First, we listened to the private sector. What are the problems? As private sector, meaning that many private associations, business associations, but representative enterprises over the world. It is, well, virtual communication helped us, and we identified what are the problems. And in identifying, we took up how best we can work with international organizations. For example, the first thing is that they have to ensure the movement of medical goods. But what are the medical goods at borders? Therefore, we came up with our list of medical goods and harmonized system, nomenclature, which is necessary for customs. And also, we worked very closely with the World Health Organization to identify necessary medical medicines for the COVID-19. And in that way, we were able to provide necessary list of essential goods. And of course, essential goods are not just limited to medicines or medical goods. Therefore, we developed a guideline for each country how to define and identify essential goods at borders that should be facilitated for the movement of goods. And also in listening to private sector, we identified that there are many problems with not only with the trade, but the transport. Therefore, we talked to international organizations in the air, maritime, road, railway, or even post to ensure that we can solve this problem jointly. And we issued many joint statements, joint letters. That kind of joint action was to remind our members, whether customs or transport sectors or postal sectors, that there are obligations and standards that should be used under this circumstance. Well, so this was how we worked with other international organizations and the pandemic. And for the future, what we see the necessity is to address digitization, because social distancing in the customs context or border context means that we have to promote more digitization, paperless trade. And therefore, that is a necessary measure. And also, we recognize that instead of big containers, there are many parcels or packets that were used e-commerce because people just staying at home and order using internet and payment through internet. And so that e-commerce has become a big push under the COVID-19. So we need to be prepared for that change of global supply chain or evolution. Another area is, of course, disaster management. And for all those areas, now we are developing new guidelines for business continuation, not only for COVID-19, but for all, crisis or, unimaginable situation. And of course, for that, we need collaboration, cooperation, input from other international organizations to ensure that the supply chain is really maintained. Well, another area that we are doing is data, because we are in the digital era, and the difference is really availability of data. And under COVID, the importance of data hasn't changed. And what we need is quality of data, data standardization, we have developed for trade. And for that, of course, we need and we are doing a very close collaboration with other international organizations. And another point of view is that communication. For communication, we need to adapt to this COVID era. So we revamped our website and used our website for the communication hub. But also in terms of communication with our members, and when we come to decision making, what kind of virtual meeting methodology is necessary? That kind of new challenge is there. Of course, pre-COVID and post-COVID, we have similar challenges. I usually talked about mainly on facilitation, but of course, protection of society and consumers, because this COVID-19 situation was exploited by organized crime and terrorist groups to exploit their own illegal profits. So in this connection, we have strengthened our cooperation with international organizations in charge of law enforcement area. So what I described is that this new era, new normal, so to speak, requires really close collaboration among stakeholders, international organizations, public or private, and also what I would like to stress is that these are challenges, but together we have to, change those challenges into an opportunity for better collaborative approach for international organizations. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mikuria. There was a lot of food for thought in your speech. Point number one, I think you reminded us that there is another part of the world which doesn't know borders, which are illegal actors. And they always take advantage of crisis. They took advantage of the financial crisis in 2008. They're now taking advantage of today's crisis. So I think it's important to remind us of that. You also reminded us of the necessity to work beyond public international organization in a strict sense of the word. And I would like here to recognize that the international organization partnership is indeed a perfect illustration of the fact that there are private sector organizations, international, intergovernmental organizations, but also non-intergovernmental organizations which are around this table, because all the international actors have to be at the table. And last but not least, I loved your motto, borders divide, customs connects. And I would suggest my colleagues to make it their own for international organization partnership. It could become borders divide, international organization partnership connects. That could be a very nice slogan. I would like now to conclude this second round of discussion with Mr. Sergio Mujica, who is the Secretary General of the International Organization for Standardization, and illustrates very well the point I just made on this public-private partnership that we need to foster at the International Organization Partnership. Mr. Mujica, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies, gentlemen, and colleagues and friends. I'm really glad to be here today and to be part of this IO partnership, and a big thank to the OECD for organizing this event. I'm particularly happy to share this panel with the WCO, which was my home for over 7 years. And now I'm with the International Organization for Standardization, which was created in 1947, right after World War II. And in the very mandate we had, there was this understanding that if we needed to rebuild the world, we needed international standards. So I think during these very difficult times, we have seen probably the best of us, and at the same time, the worst of us. And in this context, we need to build resilience to make sure that we understand the lessons, we learn the lessons we need to, and also grab the opportunities that the future presents. So it's in this context that I have 4 areas where I think we should do better if we want to be successful in the management of future phases of this crisis, and also in the next crisis that we will for sure face. First one, I think we need to do a better job in building awareness and commitment toward international cooperation. And this works both at the national level and at the international level. At the national level, maybe not too many years ago, it was a given to understand and to believe that international cooperation was needed. Maybe that is not that obvious anymore. And countries and governments were forced to react very quickly and to protect their citizens. And in this context, we understand that it's necessary to take some unilateral measures, but we need to make sure that we always first try to rely on the international system and international cooperation. So many unilateral decisions can have very difficult consequences, especially in something that was mentioned before, like the supply chain, or when we close the borders, or when we establish quarantine measures. So we do need to promote international cooperation at the national level. At the international level, it's also equally important, and it requires, first of all, to have this vision to understand that working together, we can be more effective, combining our talents rather than competing. And this also requires something that is usually not mentioned, but in my opinion is indispensable: generosity. Because the problem here, as a friend of mine used to say, everybody likes coordination, but nobody likes being coordinated. When it comes to cooperation among international organizations, we need to have that generosity to change the way we normally do things, to consider the opinion of other international organizations. And we also need to translate this into very concrete steps. Many times we see cooperation with other organizations like a nice photo opportunity for an MOU. What the world expects from us is global responses. So we need to be quite concrete on this one. So that was my first area where I think we can do better, commitment towards international cooperation. The second one, we can have better capacity to exchange information. I think we all did our best effort to be part of the solution here, but we also need to understand what the others are doing and find areas of synergies. Let me give you one example. One of the first measures we took in the context of the pandemic was to identify some key standards where necessary to fight the pandemic, such as risk management, business continuity, or resilience, and make them freely available because we normally sell our standards. As part of this response, we had a big demand of standards on respirators or ventilators. And we, working in coordination with our friends from the IEC, the International Electrotechnical Commission, identified that this is not about the ISO standards only. Users also need the electrotechnical standards related to ventilators and respirators. And we reacted together and made all the necessary standards freely available in coordination. That I think is the right approach. And we can do so much in the area of international trade, for example, or in the PPE, personal protection equipment, working together with other international organizations. The third one is how do we make all these good intentions something very tangible and concrete. So first of all, in this context, I want to provide my full support to the joint statement that is going to be signed. I think this is really important and goes in the right direction. But as next step, maybe we want to be more specific when mapping our individual efforts, identifying concrete areas of synergies, and then report back to this group to see what kind of things we were able to do together. And the fourth and last one, I think we need more agility and innovation so we can produce our solution much more quickly. There are many areas of challenge here. First is the decision-making process. We all have very complex governance structures. We were very proud of our status and rule of procedures that were reviewed in the year 2017 to make them very modern. Well, the truth is that in the context of the pandemic, they are not necessarily up to date anymore. And we cannot wait 4 weeks to make a decision, for example, when the situation is evolving, not by the month, not by the week, but by the day. So we do need to have much more flexible decision-making process. Second, we need to produce our deliverables much more quickly. And I'm talking about, in our case, international standards. So how do we use better technology to increase the level of participation? How do we review our processes? How do we create the capacity that was mentioned before of having a foresight to anticipate what the trends are? And my very last point here is about the consensus building. Most of our organizations take decisions by consensus. It's very different when it comes to virtual meetings. We were very proud that in the year 2019, we had 25% of our meetings virtually, 25. This year is 100% of our meetings virtually. What kind of impact that has in our consensus building process, and what kind of lessons we can learn together to improve that? So that's my contribution. I would be happy to share my thoughts or to answer any question there might be later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mujica. Thank you very much for those 4 points, which I think cover and wrap up very well this morning discussion. One very personal and half-joking observation about the point about the standard on respirator and ventilators. I've been working in international organizations for 30 years. And for 30 years, I've been suffering always with the same challenge each and every time I was leaving my office. What plug should I take for this particular country? And honestly, I don't think there is anybody in the world, any human being, that doesn't understand the need for having one single plug, and nobody understands why there is no single plug. I don't have any answer. you know, in terms of standardization, I think there are a number of areas which still have a lot to offer. The second point that I would like to make more seriously is, I like very much your point about combining and not competing. We are different, and at the same time, we're very complementary, and we have a lot of common challenges. And this is exactly what the International Organization Partnership is trying to foster. And lastly, the point about consensus. I think it's a crucial point. As former General Counsel of the OECD, who is an organization who works basically quasi-exclusively by consensus, I think it is the most challenging part of our common endeavor. The system that was put in place, in particular after the Second World War, was based on the recognition that people face to face would be better placed to devise common solutions. Now, this face to face will stay probably in the future, but will never be the same. There will be much more virtual meetings, there will be hybrid meetings. And I think the collective duty of all of us is how to remain a consensus organization, because I think it's still important, while not losing the effectiveness. I think there is a real issue about effectiveness versus inclusiveness, and a real balance that we need to find, a new balance that we need to find. So with those words, I would like now to give the floor for interventions. I know that I recognize at least two that have been already flagged to me, and I will give the floor to the two speakers, but I will encourage others. We have around 20 minutes, which is formidable for doing that. So I encourage people that would like to take the floor to make intervention or ask questions to convey their wishes through the Zoom application. For the moment, I will give the floor to, and he will have to, or she will have to, excuse me, Yushi to Igoe, ITU Chief Strategic Planning Officer, ITU International Telecommunication Union, for his or her intervention.
Thank you very much, moderator. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and honor to be here today. ITU is the UN Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies. Its predecessor organization was established in 1865. We harmonize the use of radio frequency spectrum and satellite orbits, develop global standards on communication technologies and services, and assist developing countries with infrastructure and policy development. We promote the use of emerging technologies and collaboration with other international organizations. As for radio communications, delegates from our 193 ITU member states attended a World Radio Communication Conference last year, review and revise the radio regulation, the only international treaty governing the use of radio frequency spectrum and satellite orbit resources. Their task is to optimize the use of radio frequency spectrum, a scarce and very valuable resource for benefit of all. As for setting standards, it is another fundamental pillar of ITU mission. Today's advanced optical, radio, and satellite networks are all based on ITU standards. For example, 95% of international traffic runs over fiber optic infrastructure built in conformance with ITU standards. ITU standards ensure interoperability, open up global markets, reduce costs through economies of scale, and spur innovation and growth. For example, 3G, 4G mobile standard is one of our success. With this standard, travelers and tourists can communicate global with practically one single terminal. Thanks to our membership of 193 members, as well as some 900 private sector companies, universities, and international and regional organizations, ITU is harmonizing the spectrum, developing the standards for 5G, the Internet of Things, blockchain, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other emerging technologies. The standards supporting these new technologies will be essential for realization of high goals, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We promote collaboration with competent organizations, such as artificial intelligence for health, AI for autonomous and assisting driving, environmental efficiency for artificial intelligence, and other emerging technologies. Sharing experience of digital technology is also useful to benefit ongoing digital transformation and continue our work to be efficient. ITU has been putting efforts to virtual meeting, automatic translation, and automatic captioning. ITU has been promoting collaboration with academia in addition to industry. ITU welcomed its first 12 academia members in 2011, and since then, ITU attracted more than 160 higher education institutions from more than 60 countries as academia members. These institutions work with governments and private sector companies, building bridge between disciplines and connecting theory to policy and markets. Some professors take leading role into our work on standards which have an impact on millions of people. Each institution finds own benefit of participation, making a win-win situation. Areas include work on central bankers on digital fiat currency, IoT, and smart sustainable city issues, radio communication, and standardization. As we look to the future, there is no doubt that long-term vision of academia will help policymakers and industry leaders prepare the impacts of major breakthrough in research so that together we can turn today's digital revolution to a development revolution. We are now in an unprecedented situation under COVID-19. Isolation measures and explosion of home teleworking and remote learning have boosted demand for telecom ICT services very suddenly. The telecom ICT sector so far responded well to meet unprecedented surge in demand, keeping world connected, offering great support to medical system, education, and others. Since early in this crisis, ITU decided to transform all meetings to virtual format. A virtual platform developed by ITU in collaboration with private sector, which has global coverage and multiple language translation, is used in many UN organizations. And more our activities go online globally, it is clear that new normal is emerging and that broadband is going to be fundamental to transition towards it. The ICT can help underpin the response to the pandemic and mitigate the impact of the crisis on many other sectors. ITU is committed to continue enhancing collaboration and the effectiveness of international rulemaking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Turigoye, and sorry for not having spelled well your name in the first place, and also apologize because I think ITU is older than BIPM actually. I think ITU dates from 1865. So I have 4 speakers who have wished to take the floor, and I would like to recognize them. Mrs. Etty Feller, Chair of ILAC, Mr. Philippe Metzger, Chair of the IEC, Stefan Noosdorf, Chair of the Regulatory Policy Committee of the OECD and working in the German Chancellery, and finally, Mr. Pascal Lafont, General Counsel of the IEA. I will give them the floor, and I think with that, we need to conclude. I would like to remind all of you, we need to conclude at 12 sharp. So I would like to give the floor now to Mrs. Etty Feller.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, distinguished guests. I would like to share some information about ILAC that was established in 1977 and to highlight some things that are unique to our organization. We work via regions. We have 6 regions around the world that based on the principle of recognition of competence, test and calibration lab, inspection body, proficiency testing, reference material that was mentioned earlier, worldwide through a mutual recognition arrangement. All of us have to understand that we are not only part of the 4th industrial revolution, but we also are part of an historical and cultural revolution. We as an international organization have understood long ago that we have to listen, we have to think out of the box and to be very flexible. We right now have MOU and cooperation with more than 10 international organizations around the world that was mentioned also by BIPM, ISO, WADA, and others. Also, some of them are professional, unique organizations like the World Anti-Doping Organization, International Halal Accreditation Forum, UNIDO, and we not only that we have MOU with these key international partners, but also we established a couple of tripartite MOUs and also part of a consortium under the name INET QI of international organizations. The main point that I wanted to highlight at this time is related to a previous remark about repetition of regulations. And at this point, I want to highlight that the General Assembly of ILAC voted last year in favor of establishing one organization with our sister organization IAF in order to reduce duplication and to be more efficient worldwide when we accredit organization for their competency. I think that earlier, Mr. Chair, you mentioned not to forget what was before the COVID-19. I think that we have to think about it and learn what to improve in our life when we will learn how to live with the COVID-19 and maybe hopefully cross fingers after the COVID-19. And with this, I want to thank you again, everyone, for listening, and thank you, OECD, for all the hard work, and especially the secretariats of all the international organizations that support all of us, the chair of the organization, in the hard work that was done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Feller, and thank you for pointing out to the role of the secretariats of international organizations. Yes, they need to be recognized once in a while. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Philip Metzer from the IEC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bonucci, and also thank you very much for facilitating this exchange today, this important exchange. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure for me to be back at the OECD, maybe earlier than I expected in my new role as the General Secretary and CEO of the International Electrotechnical Commission, having worked for many years in OECD initiatives as a civil servant, and now looking at this really again from the international perspective predominantly. And I wanted to share two thoughts on the discussion that has taken place so far, following up also in particular on what my friend Sergio Mujica said from ISO, and looking very much at the question and at the sort of objective of having a sustainable impact of what we are doing, working together as international organizations. Really in terms of a results-driven process. The first thought is more the internal dimension that we have, and I think Sergio has referred to it to some extent already. I think it is key that we as organizations in the first place make sure that we have our membership aligned on common objectives and also on evolving objectives. And of course their digitization plays an absolutely crucial role, and a crisis like the current public health crisis that we are experiencing adds, of course, many additional dimensions to it. I think also opportunities when we speak about digitization. Sergio has mentioned a concrete example of cooperation between IEC and ISO in terms of free standards. I would like maybe to add just one more example, a concrete example also when we speak about transformation, digitization, that is new tools, IT tools that we are developing, using together in standards developments. And I think that is a good example of how you can create synergies between organizations, concrete synergies that will ultimately benefit all the stakeholders beyond the organization, provided, and that's my main point here, provided that we have our own house in order, provided that we have good governance, evolving governance, that we have alignment between members on the objectives, on the action plans. And I think that is a very important work. The homework, in a sense, to be efficient in cooperating with the various international organizations starts at home, and it starts with our own house to keep that in order and to make it future-proof. That was my first thought. And the second, again, looking at the concrete result, what in the end will be the lasting effect of what we are doing. We have heard a lot about rulemaking, about standards making as well. If I look at the draft compendium that we have received in connection with today's discussion, I have done some minor statistics. I think the word standards appears 143 times. And if you look at the word conformity, because that for us as IEC is the flip side of the standard, to make sure that the standard is actually implemented, applied, and verified, the word conformity appears 14 times. So I just wanted to, and I'm not criticizing the statistics here. This is not about counting the words. I think it's essential that both appear. But I just wanted to emphasize that I think we always have to measure ourselves in the rules and standards that we're producing, in sort of what effect they produce, and whether really we're ultimately living up to those rules and standards. So those were the two main thoughts I wanted to share with the audience, and thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to intervene. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Metzer. And in particular, as former General Counsel, I'm very sensitive to your second point. Rulemaking is good, rule implementing is better. I think I said I was going to give the floor to Stefan Nosdorf and Pascal Lafont, but if you don't mind, I will revert the order so that Stefan, who represents in a sense more the members' countries, at least at the OECD, concludes. So Pascal, you have the floor, and may I ask you to be quite sharp in your intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. And from a personal point of view, I'm delighted to see you back in the OECD. We miss you very much. And I would also like to thank Céline and her team for leading the effort on this very valuable initiative. So thank you all. Now, I would like to, first of all, share the apologies and good wishes and words of encouragement from Dr. Biro, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. He would have liked to be with us today, but due to conflicting engagement, he had to send me instead, so it is a very poor replacement. One comment I would like to make after this very stimulating exchange, and again, thank you, Nicolas, for moderating it, is that effective rulemaking, in my view, goes hand in hand with ownership of our stakeholders. Our stakeholders are for the most part sovereign states, but I would include in the meaning of stakeholders civil society as well. So we really need to make sure that we touch civil society through our sovereign governments, obviously, since they are our masters, our political masters. Now, in that respect, I was stimulated to hear the words of Ambassador Purinic from SILA, where he mentioned, and please, Ambassador Purinic, correct me if I'm wrong, you want to restore citizens' confidence. And I really like that concept. My question to you for future dialogue, not today, my question is whether citizens are actually aware of our existence. And if and when they're aware of our existence, it is often through the lenses of our detractors. And I think this is something that we need to address so that our value added is shared not only by our member states, but also by civil society as a whole. In closing, Nicola, I think there is huge potential for this international organization partnership initiative. The heads intervention this morning have only confirmed that impression, but also that there is a lot of room for work, effort, and goodwill. And I encourage the OECD Secretariat to continue to lead, to go further, and with the support of all of you, all of us, we can achieve something concrete for international organizations fit to the 21st century. Thank you again.
Thank you, Pascal. Thank you also for your kind words. I think the point that you made about citizenship, awareness, ownership, and understanding of who we are and what we do is crucial. It is a common challenge that we are all facing, and maybe food for future work from the International Organization Partnership. The International Organization Partnership stemmed from a wish and initiative of the Regulatory Policy Committee of the OECD. It's normal that we conclude this today high-level webinar with the words of wisdom of the chair, the current chair of the RPC, Mr. Stefan Noosdorff. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and I'm sorry. So, thank you, Nicola, and honorable excellencies. Thank you very much for spending your time today, and even more for the dedication on the issue of better regulation, effective regulation, and a close international cooperation. And as all of you have pointed out in your contributions today, it is very difficult to imagine something which is more important today than the close cooperation and coordination of those who carry responsibilities in these days. From the position and the perspective of the chair of the Regulatory Policy Committee, I would like to reassure you that national governments are confronted with the identical challenges and discuss very similar issues. And for this reason, it is great for the Regulatory Policy Committee, as being the host and the organizational home of the IO partnership, that this partnership will continue, it will be intensified, and we are very happily looking forward to an inspiring exchange of experience, because I think national governments and international organizations can learn a lot and improve their work jointly and collaboratively. So thank you for the time today, and Nicola, thank you for your excellent moderation and management of this session.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Good to see you. It's 12 sharp and 20 seconds, so we're only 20 seconds late. I think this is an unprecedented challenge for any OECD meeting. I would like now to close the high-level webinar. And I would like to note two things. The first one is that there will be a session starting in less than 10 minutes now, which will include a photo op opportunity of all the international organizations heads that are with us today. So I invite all the heads of international organizations, all the heads of international organizations to join this Zoom session, which will be devoted to that and only open to them, which will start at 12:10. But I would like also to invite all the participants of this morning to reconvene for the afternoon session of the webinar, which will focus on advancing the compendium of IO practices. And this will take place via Zoom at 3 p.m. Paris time. I would like to thank everybody for the statements. I think I understand that all those statements will be available. And I really would like to, in particular, thank all the heads of international organizations, Minister Adams and Secretary General Gurria, for a very powerful and substantive session. Let me say, in 30 years, much more substantive than some other meetings that I have attended in the past. Thank you very much.